Hey guys, it's Amber from NotableInk.com. Today I'm sharing one of my favorite techniques, stencils plus watercolor. Whether you're creating a full background panel or a focal point, this is a quick and easy way to add a lot of impact to your cards. Welcome to the Altenew Educator, Style It with Stencils blog hub. Click on the blog link below to get the full list of artists for loads of inspiration and prizes. I'll start with Altenew Leaves and Berries Stencils because it's so festive, and I'm going to spray the back of it with some pixie spray. This is a temporary spray adhesive. I find this is the best practice, is to spray the back of your stencil and then to lightly press it onto your watercolor paper. This one is cut to 4 1/4 by 5 1/2, which is a standard A2 size. So I'm just going to press that down. There are some delicate areas, and so I'm just going to flip it over and run my bone folder across the back to make sure things are good and adhered. Now, I haven't had any issues removing the stencil with the pixie spray, but you do want to remove it gently. I've pulled out my Artist 24 pan watercolor set from Altenew, and here I have Green Meadows. So I wanted to do a traditional green and red berry festive background for this Christmas card. I'm going to go ahead and spray the entire panel with some water. It's just clean, clear water. And I wanted to saturate that so that it would be a wet on wet technique. And it's just more efficient to spray it than to use a brush to wet the entire panel. I added a drop of water to the Green Meadow pan to rehydrate the pigment, and I'm just going straight from the pan to the card, and I'm filling in all the leaves with the Green Meadows pigment. I'll just speed that up here so you can see the rest of it. If there were any areas that were too dark, then I just dropped in a little bit more color until I was satisfied with the richness and the depth of the watercolor. I've switched over to Red Cosmos here for the berries, and I've switched to a smaller brush. This is a number 4 or 6 round brush, and I'm just dropping that into the berries, and if it mixes with the green on the stem, I'm totally okay with that. Gently remove the stencil, and you'll see that the pigments will continue to move a little bit. Then just set that aside to air dry. If you let it air dry, there'll be less warping. For the sentiment, I'm going to use the Festive Silhouettes stamp set. This is such a fun stamp set. It has great silhouettes in it, and I absolutely love the style of this sentiment. It's really large, so it can be the focal point of your card, and it's just a fun style. I've stamped this on Neenah Classic Crest Solar Weight 80 pound that I've cut with a rounded rectangle die, and it was stamped in ruby red crisp dye ink, which coordinates perfectly with the Red Cosmos. So I felt like it was getting a little bit lost on the busy leaves and berries background. So I'm going to just go back to that Green Meadows, and here I have a 3/4 inch angled flat brush. Add a little bit more water to my brush so I can get the pigments to move. And I've die cut a piece of watercolor paper with a larger rounded rectangle die. So I'm just going to slap on some color here, and I don't want it to be too smooth, but I didn't want to have any white spots either. Really, you're only going to see the edges of this, so you could go either way. I would set that aside to dry, and once it's dry, I'll go ahead and adhere the sentiment, and then I'll pop that up on the background panel. The shade of this red and the Green Meadows are just so pretty, and I think it just brings this stencil to life. Moving on to the next card, I'll use the wonderful Wreath Stencil. This is another great stencil for everyday use, but also lends itself beautifully to seasonal cards, holiday cards. So here I have the same Green Meadows, Red Cosmos, and now I'm adding pure white. Now, if you are a traditional watercolorist, you may have heard that you don't use white. Watercolor pigments are translucent, so when you add white, that's going to make anything you mix it with opaque because it's an opaque paint, more like a gouache. So typically what you would do instead is avoid painting in the areas that you want to keep white. You'd keep that white space, and that would serve as your highlight. If you follow me or you know me, I don't generally follow the rules. So basically what I wanted to go for here was a silver dollar eucalyptus look. Those are kind of like a creamy white texture, white green texture. They almost have like a white waxy finish to them. So I decided to add white. So I mixed Green Meadows, a whole bunch of the pure white, and I added shades of purple to tone back the vibrancy of the mixture that I already had. So just go ahead and put this on top on the leaves, and I have quite a bit of pigment here. I'm okay if this kind of bleeds outside the lines once I gently remove the stencil, but I'm going to need to dry this and clean my stencil in between applications. Now that's really pretty just as it is, but I wanted a nice full wreath. So I'm actually going to repeat this 4 times with a slightly different color each time. You want to dab your stencil dry and get the pigment off. And then I have a dual speed heat tool here. This is from Wow. I have it on the lowest setting, and I'm holding it about 8 inches away from the watercolor paper. I don't want to get too close, and I don't want to do this with the highest setting, which to me feels like it has more heat or stronger heat, because I don't want to warp my paper. I want to keep my paper nice and flat. It's going to be harder for the stencil to adhere to it if it's warped. So you can see it's staying nice and flat. If you start to get a little bit of a curl, then heat the paper from behind. That'll flatten it out, and then come back to the front to finish it off. Now that the paper and stencil are dry, we'll apply the stencil a second time, making sure that it's in a different orientation. So you want to make sure that each of the 4 layers is visible, so you don't want to put it back in the same spot. So shift it a little bit so that you're going to be able to see these individual leaves. And I'm going to mix more white into this, so I want even a lighter version of that first color that I used. So I'm not going to do too much mixing. I'm going to mostly stay in that white puddle. And I do have pixie spray sprayed on the back of the stencil. I didn't need to reapply the pixie spray. I was able to apply this stencil 4 times with that same application. So here we have the lightest layer, and you can see it's just like a ghost of the leaves. And even though you've got that opaque in there, they do look a little transparent because they're so light. Here I have Starry Night, and I'm going to add that to my mixture here. I wanted to add a little bit of a blue layer for more of a wintry card. These would also be great colors for Hanukkah. And I didn't think about this until just now, but if you did one of these layers in your metallic paint, say like a silver or a gold, that would be absolutely gorgeous. So this time I'm going to shift the stencil upwards, and that's going to allow me to get the wreath even larger. So before I kind of just turned it but kept it still centralized with the previous wreath, this time I'm shifting it up. So here I'm going to add the blue, and I'll speed that up since we've seen the application before. It's the same every time. You kind of just slap the pigment down. And now when I remove the stencil, you're going to see that the wreath looks really wonky, right? Because that blue one is set so far upwards. So the wreath starts to look like a really odd shape. That means your next layer, you need to shift the stencil down so that you can get back to that circular pattern. Because right now it's starting to look like a weird oval. So I'll shift this downwards, and then I'll mix up a bit more of the Green Meadows with the pure white. And so this is going to be the 4th and final layer. This one will be even more of that opaque white. And that completes our 4th and final layer. Once the stencil is removed, again, I'll go ahead and dry this with my heat tool and then stamp the sentiment. So here's the Festive Silhouettes stamp set. I'm going to use that same sentiment because I like it so much and it fits perfectly inside the center of my wreath. This time I'm going to stamp it in Obsidian Pigment Ink, and I'm just going to turn my Misty, since I still have that watercolor up in the left hand corner. I'm going to use that to splatter it after I stamp the sentiment, so I don't want to clean it up just yet. Now, because this is watercolor paper, you are going to need to stamp it more than once, even with the Obsidian Pigment Ink, which is usually a one and done kind of ink. So I'll stamp that twice, and then we'll move on to the splatter. Now I started the splatters with what looks like a number 4 round brush, so they're super fine and you can barely see them. I'll splatter a few and then I'll show you how small they are. After that, I went ahead and switched to a number 8 round brush and added some additional splatter so it would be a little bit larger. Here's the finished card where you can see the larger and the smaller splatter. I love how full the wreath is because it has the 4 layers with little bit different shades of blue with each one of those layers. And here's the cards together. I hope that you guys enjoyed my stop on the Altenew Educator Style It with Stencil blog hops. Use the link below to head over to my blog and be sure to leave some love along the hop to enter the giveaway. Thanks so much for joining me today. If you enjoyed this video, please consider subscribing, liking, and ringing that bell so you don't miss any new inspiration. Here's a couple more videos for you before you leave, and I'll see you real soon.